Do you find that after a close loss, you actually could have won the game if maybe you hadn't resourced a certain card? Or how about when you pick up a new deck, you're really struggling on the first two cards to resource in a given game? What's up, guys? KTOD Matty back with another SWU Academy video, hitting you with my tips and tricks on resourcing. I think resourcing is one of the hardest skills in the game and is definitely something that differentiates a good player from a great player. So let's dive into it and see if we can up your resourcing game. All right, when talking about resourcing, I think there are three things to consider. First, know your role. Your candy butt. No, know your deck's role in the matchup. This is the common phrase, who's the beatdown, right? You have to know your role in a given matchup. Are you supposed to be a control player in that matchup, even if you're not a control deck? Or are you supposed to race the other deck? Say you're two control decks, but the other one is a better top end. So you got to find a way to pressure them early. That's know the role. And that is going to be something that super influences the decisions you make with resourcing and mulligans and all that good stuff. The second one, all right, and the second one is going to be common plays from your opponent. This again kind of harkens back to Mike's leveled thinking video, but the idea here is not only what is my deck going to do, but what is my opponent going to do? What are common plays that line up against them? So I just went on late night gaming recently, and I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with my three resource play, my turn two play in the game, and as I weighed my options, I, said out loud, like, oh, you're probably going to play, you're going to cheat out a K2 with your Han on this second turn. How does that line up with what I want to be doing? So when I resourced on that turn, I made sure I kept a Yoda. And my theory there was he plays K2, I play Yoda. When they trade, the the card that I would lose from K2, because usually you're discarding, it was actually a Han Mirror. The card I was going to lose would get offset by the card I was going to draw, and I would stay at parity because I was worried about getting pillaged out. So that's an example of a time where when I resourced, I said, okay, what is my opponent going to be doing this play? Whereas I could have kept the make an opening, which like seems like it'd be an insane blowout, and it still could have been. However, I wanted to stay even on cards. So if I make an opening to his guy, I didn't care about my life total then. If I make an opening, I'm down one card from the make an opening, right? I trade out with his card, but then he gets me to discard versus Yoda, K2, discard, draw card. So that was my theory there, and so it influenced my resourcing decision on that turn. If you haven't checked it out, you should go check out my spot on the late night guys. We had a good time. I played two matches. I played Han Blue and Kira, and it was fun. All right, and then the third thing we're going to talk about is risk reward. What certain matchups you're going to need to take those risks for a big payout to win, or not, or you can the way your deck interacts with theirs, you might not need to. Certain considerations there. I think risk for versus reward is kind of an understated part of this equation, and I really want to hit into it. So those are three things, and I'm going to go more in depth for you. Know your role and shut your mouth. Can't My rock eyebrow isn't as good as it used to be when I was a kid. All right, so know your role. Knowing your role is super important in how you're going to resource in a given matchup. It's going to influence your mulligans, all that good stuff. And I kind of alluded to it, but let's go further into it. I am playing Kira, and I am against Sabine. Well, that one's kind of obvious. No, maybe not to everyone. What cards do I need? I need small units to throw into their guys. I need removal. I need some healing, right? Why is that? Because I'm playing the control deck. They're trying to kill me fast. I need to jump block with Pike Sentinel, finish them off with a make an opening, get some health back. In my 30-point base, I'm going to play Chilton, hopefully get an overwhelming barrage and follow it up with a Vigilance. And then you play your big stuff, which would mean I need to prioritize those cards, which could mean I might have, there's easy cards to get rid of, like Avenger, obviously, like I'm never getting there. But what if I'm playing Reinforcement Walker, right? Or a Redemption in Blue Han? Like, when do I keep that? That's my win condition, but I need to be able to get there. And we'll talk a little bit more of that in risk reward. But knowing my role, knowing the cards that I need to win the game, And how I'm going to get there is super important. Now, in my opening hand, I might need to bin the redemption because it's just, I need to focus on surviving and then playing to my second one, right? But as the game progresses, now we're on the 4 or 5 resource turn. Do I have enough gas or can I draw into a few things to get me to that redemption? Because around then, I would say that is a clear signal that this is how you're going to win the game versus your opening hand where you might have a little bit of trouble. The same thing when you go back to the cure example of, prioritizing those cards like the vigilance in the opening hand. And that's why I play 3. You might have to bin because you're like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to survive to 6 resources to use this to like swing the game. But when I draw it on my second, third turns, I'm feeling a little more comfortable keeping it. So knowing my role, here's another one that we can throw at you, and that is like, and this was a set 1 matchup that I used to face a lot. It was like Iden versus Palp. You're like, oh man, they're the better control deck. Now I need to start keeping like every small unit I have, never resourcing like my snowtrooper lieutenants because they're pumping in. They're like my fleet lieutenant for Sabine. Like I'm playing like a pseudo version of that, right? In what matchup would you ever want to be playing that aggressively? Well, I'm knowing my role. I'm the aggro deck in this matchup here. So knowing your role is super important because your deck is not going to play the same every game, and that's why resourcing is such a cool aspect of the game, is because you don't lose out on teching for certain matchups or you want to have a very toolboxy. In other ways, like you're very toolboxy, right? And so in a certain matchup, you might keep your Admiral Akbar, but you might bin it in another one, in a like a Han green deck that plays, the 7-drop spell that brings your guys out, right? Like that, you might be toolboxy in that regard. So in any given matchup, when you sit across the table, you see their leader, you're going to kind of start to think about where you line up with them, which is going to bring us into our next point of common plays for your opponent. So identify, 1, what kind of deck am I playing versus my opponent, and how do I fit into that? And then 2, another point to make about this is that, and this is like in your games 2 and 3, what specific cards did they play and how did they play, and how do I stack up? Because we've all faced it where we line up against what we think is a Tarkin blue aggro deck, and it ends up being like playing Endless Legion for 16, and we lose the game because we had no idea of that. So you gotta do that first check in the first game. Where do we line up? And then after game 1, you got to say, okay, now given the cards, and we'll go into their plays the second time, but like given their cards and how they played the game, does this still check out? And if so, great. And if not, you adjust. But know your role. Shut your mouth. All right, so I talked about my spot on late night and identifying what my opponent was going to do and how I could best attack or stay at parity in the game with their plays. Knowing what your opponent is going to do is super pivotal in any matchup. I always run this little like mental simulator of like how I think the game is going to go and what are the key plays that my opponent is trying to make, right? Like against Sabine, they're either going to like ECL a K2 or they're going to try to like ECL Wrecker. Sometimes Poe, but Wrecker's the better one. In set 1, it was like ECL Steadfast Battalion. Everyone was ready for that play. As the game grows, there's going to be more plays like that. You got to be ready for more stuff. But those are the big plays that they are going to try to accomplish, right? So I'm going to bring this example back from another video of Pillage, right? Normally you wouldn't want Pillage against Sabine because it's so slow and you need to deal with what's on the board rather than what's in their hand. However, as you resource, you might find that they're down to 2 cards in hand and you actually did a good job at navigating the early turns. And you normally would bin Pillage, but you draw it on your like 4 or 5 resource turn and you're able to actually pillage out their last 2 cards in hand so they can't set up that ECL Wrecker play. Well, how do we get there? We kept thinking about the matchup, kept thinking about their common plays and ways to attack it. So all of a sudden a card that normally wouldn't be that great for us works out and is the card that we want. Another like way to think of that is if you're worried about that play, sometimes you might suicide a guy into one of theirs unfavorably because you don't want to You don't want them to have that play. So how does this come into resourcing, right? These are plays, but resourcing is super important because we have to see how we're going to get there, right? We're going to see what cards that we need. Yes, we have the pillage, but about the suicide play, well, maybe we need to keep a late make an opening to like attack in and then use two cards, two for one ourselves in a way, but we're taking out, a big card out of theirs. Or like sometimes you're running out of cards and you have to make a decision between a more utility card and like an on-curve bomb, right? So let's look at if I'm playing Blue Han against Boba Fett. There might be a time where I need to freaking keep Conquer Dawn Interceptors over an Obi-Wan, because if they play, they're gonna play their Fire Spray, and if I don't have Fell the Dragon or a way to deal with that, I'm gonna be blown out. So, as you play the game, and as you get to that turn, a common play for them is to play Fire Spray, 5 or 6 depending on the matchup. I'm getting there. I don't have it. Um, Sometimes you're gonna have to bin an Obi-Wan and keep, and keep Conquer Dawn, and you know, that's not the wrong play, because a lot of times you bin that Conquer Dawn, being like, well, I gotta play Obi, especially in this deck, I can cheat him out. He'll pump up my guys, all that. But next thing you know, you've taken 15 from a Fire Spray, and you never saw your Fell the Dragon, or I guess to a lesser extent you never saw the Redemption, but still you got to give yourself those out. So as the game progresses, just like that pillage play I talked about, you have to keep, doing, okay, what are they going to do next? How does this affect my cards? And, that making those tough calls, and we'll talk about risk reward, but making those tough calls is how you win games. So giving yourself the most information possible to make those decisions. And one of them is, we talk about your role, but also what things are they going to do? Um, if they're setting up the Cantina Bouncer, like, okay, maybe we'll use Obi-Wan again. Maybe I'll bin Obi-Wan because I actually want to play two things, so he can't super blow me out with with the bounce. Or I am gonna keep someone with 5 power over 4 power because I know that they play cunning, things like that. So as you play through the game, do that mental check in your head. Start doing a little mental simulator. What are the cards they play? When do they play them? And how can I best interact with them, given what I have and what they do. All right, so the last point that I want to talk about is risk versus reward. So how do we play in a way, or how do we resource in a way to account for risk versus reward? Well, number one, we know our role. Number two, we look at their common plays, and then taking that into effect, we look at our matchup and say, like, do we need to take this risk to win? Is this something we're favorable and we can just kind of play a more steady game, or is this something that we need to take those chances because our percentage points line up in a certain way? So to me, that's risk versus reward. That is keeping a redemption or a reinforcement walker early when you're a slower deck against aggro, because you know that you need that card to win the game, and if you don't hit it, you're never going to win anyway. And that can be really hard to do, especially on the first turn. And there's a lot of times where you just can't, you can't keep that reinforcement walker off the rip unless you have, 5 other cards that are really good early. But if you're not going to win without it, on second or third turn, you draw that card, you're going to have to just get in there and try to make something work. So to me, that's risk versus reward. That is keeping the Luke early, keeping the Maul early when, there's a chance that you could just blank out and, have very, very inefficient turns because you know that this one card in the matchup is going to get you there. And maybe you don't make it there. That's the thing that you need to figure out, is with percentage points of like, do I need to be assuming this risk, or can I play it more standard? I think a lot of people hold on to those big cards because they're so powerful, but if you're never going to get to them, or if you don't super need them to win the game, if you really need to just swat a couple flies early, you need to understand that. And again, that comes down to the first 2 points. But yeah, risk versus reward is basically, hey man, my percentage points are pretty lousy. I got to hold on to this 8 drop and hope I get there. Try to, the play that I would do with reinforcement walker is that, I'd obviously try to stick a Admiral Piet and get that big heal and kind of flip the game from there. I did that a bit in my showdown when I played Vader and things like that. So I think that this is the piece that it blends into the other, but I think it's important to delineate when you need to take risks and when you don't, and how that will affect your resourcing. Maybe you need to hold on to a felled dragon all game, and you're like, man, I know I can't resource this because he's gonna play Poe and I need it. You know what I mean? Or he's gonna play Luke, or he's gonna play Avenger, and you just hold on to that card and you just grit it out, and maybe you're falling behind a little bit, but you stick that card and it wins you the game. Like those are the things that you need to be able to assess. And I think if you can do that using the first 2 points and then realizing, given those two, do I need these extra percentage points for this card or not? I think that'll get you more wins. All right, so that was 3 considerations that you will need to process when deciding to resource in Star Wars Unlimited. If you can identify your role in a matchup, how your deck commonly aligns with the plays that your opponent is doing, and when you need to assume certain amount of risk to win the game, you're going to find your resourcing decisions are going to be a lot easier. Your games are going to be a lot crisper, and you're not going to have those moments where you're like, man, if I just didn't resource this Fell the Dragon on the 3rd turn, I could have done something. Or, man, I know pillage is bad against aggro, but if I had just saved it for this 1 turn because I saw it and I just binned it because I know you're not supposed to use it in that situation. You got to take these things into consideration, and that when you do that mental checklist, you'll be more present in your matches, and you'll realize that things are a little more fluid. All right, so that was resourcing. Please let me know in the comments what other type of topics you want me to cover. I'm going to do a mix of, general strategy, and that'll be in my SWU Academy playlist, and, stories when applicable. And I'll find some other ways. Maybe we'll do some live deck building, or, maybe look at hands and kind of decide what we're going to mulligan. Let me know what you want to see in the comments. If any of those sound good, or if you have some cool ideas, I'd love to see it, because this is kind of a way to reach a smaller audience than the big KTOT page, and just kind of see what you guys want from me and how I can help you out. All right, have a good day. Booyah.